Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 55 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ersman, and I'll be your host today for another really great episode I am looking forward to sharing with you. So today I am speaking with Ron Klassen. He is the Executive Director of RHMA, also known as the Rural Home Missionary Association. And Ron is the final speaker who will be joining us at the convention coming up here in July that you haven't heard yet on the podcast. So I'm excited to introduce you to him. He has previously been an MB pastor at the church in Corn, Oklahoma, but has been since then really focused in on providing resources specifically for church leaders in rural communities. And so I don't know where you're listening today, but I know that we have a lot of people who listen and lead in smaller churches around the country. And I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Ron and his experience dealing with specifically smaller towns and rural communities. And, the benefits that come with that and some of the challenges and ways that all of us can kind of work together and learn from each other to kind of better reach our communities wherever we are serving. So I really enjoyed getting to know Ron. I think you'll enjoy it as well. So let's take a quick break to hear from a sponsor and get right to my conversation with Ron Klassen.
Relationships are vitally important for our newly affiliated Congolese USMB churches, and the Congolese Task Force is encouraging Congolese pastors to attend USMB Gathering 2022 in Kansas City, July 26th through the 30th. However, getting to Kansas City will be cost prohibitive for some of our Congolese leaders. Would you consider making a donation to help a Congolese pastor attend USMB Gathering, or intentionally connecting with a Congolese pastor at the convention? For more on how you or your church might partner with a Congolese congregation or to donate, visit www.usmb.org/operation-meet-me-in-KC.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to someone else who will be with us at the convention coming up here in July. Today I'm speaking with Ron Klassen, who is the Executive Director of the Rural Home Missionary Association, or RHMA, as it's maybe better known. So Ron, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Grateful to have you with us.
Glad to be with you.
And you and I were chatting beforehand. Some people might know you or recognize your name at least. You were in Corn, Oklahoma for many years as an MB pastor. I know you speak at MB events regularly, so you're familiar with the MB family, and we're grateful to have you both today and for the convention. So for people who don't know you, why don't you fill in any other gaps that you want to tell us, bio, what you did in Corn, what you currently do now, whatever else you'd like to fill in before we dive in.
Yeah, so I'm a city guy who woke up one day and found himself in a rural community, and I was asking myself, how in the world did that happen? Okay. And it was certainly not Ron Klassen's wonderful plan for his life, but it was God's plan. And now as I look back on 40 years of ministry, it has been a wonderful plan. I feel very privileged. My wife has been with me every step of the way, Roxy, and got 3 adult children, and 2 of them are married. And we're just at a good place in life right now, just really, really enjoying life. And I will say that our years in Corn, Oklahoma, pastoring the Corn Mennonite Brethren Church were some of the best years of our lives, some of the best years of ministry for us. We loved the people there. We loved the community. And one of the hardest things that we've ever done in all of our lives was to leave Corn. And if we had not had RHMA on the table to come to, I'm quite confident that we would have stayed there for a long time. God was so good to us during those years, and we have great memories.
Oh, good. That's awesome. I love hearing that. So you told me you've been at RHMA for 30 years, which is a long time, but I know that they've actually been around a lot longer than that even. So if people aren't really familiar, can you tell us more about that organization? What is it? Why was it founded? And what do you do with them?
Yeah, RHMA was founded. We're celebrating 80 years this year. Mm-hmm. I'm the 5th director during those years. Our mission statement is to plant and strengthen churches in small town America. So we have a staff of church planters. We have a staff of missionary pastors who enter churches that maybe are in need of some revitalization. Sometimes small town churches kind of get in trouble and they need an outside organization to come alongside them for a while, kind of help them get back on their feet again. So we have staff out there that are doing that kind of work. And our church strengthening work also takes us a number of places. We host small town pastors conferences. We lead seminars all across the country. We have educational, equipping kinds of programs for seminary students. And actually, I'm leading a doctor of ministry cohort now for rural and small town pastors as well. So cool. Lots of church strengthening efforts that we do here at RHMA.
Okay, very cool. And you mentioned in your bio there that you kind of consider yourself a city guy, or at least you were. So was Corn kind of your first small town experience, or how did you go from big city guy to the rural expert? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was a very ordinary kind of thing, though it caught me by surprise. No, Corn was my second experience, actually.
Okay.
I was in seminary, and I came to that last year of seminary. I do what seminary students do. They look at opportunities, and I discovered that there were almost no opportunities, multi-staff kind of situations. I always thought, well, I'll start out as kind of like the number 5 guy on a 5-person pastoral staff somewhere in a city or suburban context. There was almost none of that available. There were tons of opportunities in smaller churches, and many of them in smaller communities, to be a solo pastor. And the short of it is, Roxy and I ended up in the Sandhills of Nebraska, and we pastored a rural church there for several years. And while we were there, we were just struck with the spiritual needs in rural communities. We always thought that, cities kind of had a corner on the market when it came to sin. And we found that there was plenty of spiritual need in rural communities. We found there was a great need for vibrant Bible teaching, gospel proclaiming churches, many towns without them. And we just sat by the hour and we talked about what we were seeing around us. And we kept saying, somebody ought to do something. It just became a burden on our hearts. And at some point, I think the conversation started to turn to, well, maybe we can be 2 of those somebodies. And by that point, we thought, we're loving rural life, much to our surprise. And we love the people that we're serving. So, and God seems to be using us. So why don't we just be all in? Let's just commit our lives to it. And that's what we've done. And we've been involved in rural ministry ever since.
Very cool. Here in just a minute, I know kind of our topic for the convention coming up is evangelism. So we'll get there in just a second. But before we dive into that, I want to hear a little bit more. See, it sounds like you came from a big church background, or at least that was kind of your plan. So as you kind of transition to these smaller churches, I feel like every church feels like they need more money, more people, more staff. I mean, I feel like on some level, we all have the same kind of needs, or at least we feel like we have the same kind of needs, more technology, whatever. But I'm sure there are specific things that are different for smaller rural churches. So especially if you came from a bigger church background, what did you see as you kind of got settled that were needs that were different from larger churches?
Yeah, so I did come from a big church background in Phoenix. And one of the things I've realized over the years is that we all have our own personal culture. Mm-hmm. And then there's a community culture. And then there's a church culture.
Sure.
And the culture of a small church is quite a bit different than the culture of a large church. Yeah. But at the time, I didn't realize I was in cross-cultural ministry. I looked around, everybody spoke English. Most of them were Caucasian. Mm-hmm. They drove vehicles like I drove. And I didn't realize that I was in cross-cultural ministry. So, Of course, I tried to import everything that I knew, just thinking, well, that's what you do. So unwittingly, I tried to make my small church into a big church. Right. Now, I fully realized that with the population in our community, we probably wouldn't actually be big in size. But I thought, well, we could at least be big in how we do things in practice, as a church. Mm-hmm. I sort of had kind of a prideful attitude as well, kind of looking down from a perspective of pride on people, basically kind of the attitude of, you're fortunate to have me here to kind of help you get back on, or to figure out how to do things correctly. Yeah. And as you can imagine, that didn't go over real well. But I was so fortunate. The people in our first church were very gracious and kind and forgiving, and they allowed us to make some mistakes. They allowed us to kind of figure out what a small church culture is like, and make a lot of adjustments along the way. So I'm very indebted to our first church and the people that were part of that church for being patient with me and really being my teachers as I had to learn rural culture and rural church ministry.
I'd imagine it would be hard for a pastor, no matter, the age or the amount of experience. If you are leading a relatively smaller congregation, I could see how that would be disappointing. I'm sure when you dream of being a pastor, you dream of speaking to, I'm guessing, a larger group, or at least having a large impact. And I could see how pride could slip in there. But at the same time, like, you want more and more people to hear the gospel of Christ, right? Like, there's that side of it, I think, is good and healthy. You want more and more people to hear this. So is that something, did you wrestle with that? Like, especially being at a smaller church, the pride element is part of it, but also, like, you want a lot of people to hear this. So I could see how that'd be kind of a competing thing in your head.
Yes, it was for a while. But one of the things I came to realize is that when you're in a smaller place, you can actually have greater impact in some ways. I call it the sphere of influence principle. Okay. If you're in a city like Phoenix, it would be easy to think, oh, wow, I could reach 1 million people for Christ. Look at all these people, Yeah. Well, how many people in Phoenix truly reach 1 million people for Christ? Most people that I know would be fortunate, even pastors, to know even 1,000 people. Sure. In a city of 1 million, or in Phoenix case, 5 million. Right. And I think, well, translate that then into a small town context. If I'm in a town of a couple of thousand, I'm going to easily know 1,000 of those 2,000, and probably closer to 2,000. Sure. And very likely, I'm going to know those people in a much more intimate, relational way than I would the same 1,000 people if they were in the city, because in a small town, you do life together. You rub shoulders. You run into each other when you're in the post office or in the cafe, or you wave to each other when you're going down the road. These are people that you know. And so, when I walked into the cafe in Corn, I knew everybody there. And in a way, I could influence everybody in that cafe. When I walked into a restaurant in Phoenix, the chances are the only person I knew was the person sitting across from me at the table. Right. And so I just quickly came to the realization that what matters is not how many people are in close proximity, but how many people I'm able to influence. Yeah. And I came to the realization that I can actually influence more people in a smaller population place. And that was kind of a wake up for me that really, really helped me to feel more settled and feel like my life, I was stewarding my life well, even though I wasn't among the masses.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like how you put that. And I wonder if you feel, I think we all probably feel that the grass is always greener effect a little bit, where you're able to have those really deep relationships that a lot of pastors at bigger churches can't have. But I'd imagine there are times when, if you are at a smaller church, you'd be like, oh man, it should be nice if we could have, the big building with all the classrooms or all the technology or more staff or whatever. So again, I'm sure both are true, right? So I guess you kind of, wherever you are, the goal is probably just to settle in and figure out what fits your community best. Is that what you would say?
Well, I think settling everything between your two ears as well.
Right, sure.
There's so much that we need to take into our minds and realize, and a lot of it is where we get our identity from. Is it because we have large crowds that we preach to every Sunday? Some of it is it a good use of my life to be in a rural ministry And sure, you're going to wrestle with that. But then you start looking at our Lord's ministry. It was mostly rural. And you think, well, if it was good enough for Christ, maybe it's okay for me to be a rural pastor as well.
Sure.
And then, sure, you're constantly thinking about your limitations. I wish I had more money. I wish our building was nicer. Wish we had a few more people that could help out, all those kinds of things. But then you have to stop and think, no, wait a second, is God's hands tied by all these limitations? What is God not able to do in our, what we perceive to be a very limiting kind of place? And there are scads of scriptures, scads of stories in the Bible that remind us that God can do big things in small places. Yeah. He's not tied by limited resources, limited people, limited building, whatever we might think is standing in the way of success.
That's a good reminder to keep in mind for sure. So at the convention, I know evangelism is going to be kind of the key of what you're going to be talking about. And I'd like to hear more about evangelism in a rural context. So I live in Wichita, kind of a bigger city. I've mostly lived in bigger cities. So I'm curious, like you mentioned, if you live in a small town where pretty much everybody, there are obviously pros and cons to that too, right? I imagine evangelism can be hard. And if you become known as, oh, here comes Pastor Ron, all he's going to do is talk about Jesus for the next 30 minutes. That's got to be hard when there's kind of a smaller group of people. So what are some of the challenges specifically about evangelism, or on the flip side, the positives that come with being in a smaller community?
Well, I would say that one of the challenges is actually awareness. And it sounds so antithetical to what I've already said about you're in a context of social intimacy. You pretty much know everybody. You know what's happening in everybody's lives. And sometimes you know more than what you probably should know and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how under the radar, people can move into your community, for instance, that you're not even aware of. Mm-hmm. I remember back when we were in Corn, I was having a conversation with the town utility guy in our town of 500 people. And he just kind of made an offhanded comment. He said, in the last 3 months, I bet I've hooked up 12 electric meters here in Corn. Okay. And I'm sure my jaw dropped. And I said, no way. You're exaggerating. I know everybody in town. And I couldn't name 12 family units that have moved into town in the last 3 months. And he said, well, I'll give you some names. And of course, back then, privacy was not the concern that it would be today. So he literally just started rattling off names of people who had moved into town, where they were in town. Mm-hmm. And I was absolutely in shock. Yeah. I took that information to our evangelism committee, and their first response was exactly like mine. They said, no way. Huh. And then I gave them names. And then we said, maybe we ought to think about this. Maybe we ought to start here with some of our evangelistic efforts. And so we actually put together a couple of strategies. One was every one Wednesday night a month, our adult Bible study group that met. Instead of doing Bible study, we would actually go in various places. By ones and twos, and visit some of the newcomers in town. Okay. Another thing that we did was we always made sure that there was at least one family available on Sunday morning to invite any newcomers who came into our church over for Sunday dinner. So just kind of a spontaneous, hey, I don't know you, introduce yourself and say, well, we've got extra potatoes and meat. Why don't you come over for dinner? Let's get acquainted. So it was very low key, but just being aware of what's happening can be a big thing. And then being aware of who these newcomers are. Are they a certain kind of group of people? For instance, if they are a different ethnicity. Nowadays, small towns, the populations are increasingly multi-ethnic. Are they the new rural poor? There's a lot of new rural poor, like inner city poor people that are moving into rural communities. There's the new rural rich that are moving into communities. People want to buy acreage and they want toys that they can play with out on the acreage.
Yep.
There are a lot of remote workers now moving to rural communities. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of the labor force in rural communities are now working remotely. So it means don't only be aware of who's moving in, but that people are moving in, identify them, but then who are these people? Yeah. And then just develop strategies and ministries that can reach these people. So that was one of the effective things that we were able to do years ago. Another thing I think that is really helpful as we think about outreach is to think in terms of, or think about people who are in transition. Because I think people in transition are particularly receptive to outreach. So obviously newcomers in town would be one example, but another example would be newly married people. Yeah. Often nowadays, people who get married come from troubled homes, from homes where they had divorced parents, and they want to chart a new path. And included in that path would be an openness to coming into church and becoming a part of a congregation. So that would be an example. Newly widowed people would be another example. Yeah. Maybe other crises that people find themselves in, hospitalization, serious injury. Rural people are great at helping others in crisis in their community. So it's just a very natural thing for them to be especially aware and want to reach out to these kinds of people. Parents who are new parents giving birth would be another time. They maybe weren't a part of the church, but they want to raise their young baby in the church. And so they are open to coming back. So I think people in transition are also just really important people for us to give special attention to.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really smart strategy. I like that a lot. And I think so, like in Wichita or in other bigger cities, I feel like when you're in a bigger church, there's always going to be a lot of people who don't know Jesus, right? There's always going to be a pretty large population that you can reach out to. And so in smaller towns, that may not always be true, right? So if there aren't any newer people for a season, or maybe you've kind of you're aware of all the transitions that you just mentioned, and that's you're kind of keeping an eye on those, but that's about it. How do you, as a pastor, what do you do with the families who just aren't interested? Do you just kind of let them be? I imagine that's kind of an awkward spot for you as a pastor. You care about them, and you obviously want to grow your church, but if people show that they're not interested and they're not in a time of transition, how do you balance evangelism in those kind of situations?
Obviously, it's not our job to somehow make people respond to the gospel. Right. It's our job, especially in a rural community, I think, to be relational with those people, to try to find ways to bring them into our circle of relationships. And then just look for the opportunities. Sooner or later, a crisis is going to come into their life, or they're going to have a baby, or there's going to be a death or something. And that opportunity is going to come, but you can kind of set the table for that opportunity by developing those relationships. And in a small town, that's a very natural thing to do. I think it's much more difficult to try to develop relationships in a massive place where you don't know people and you're not rubbing shoulders, you're not doing life with them. But in a small town, it's very natural, and it's very natural for believers and unbelievers to relate to each other. It could be over a cup of coffee in the cafe. It's very common to have believers and unbelievers in a coffee group that meets every morning at 7:00. You can do things like hunting together. You can do crafty kinds of things. Just all those kinds of things, because you know each other. You're rubbing shoulders with each other. Unbelievers aren't necessarily thinking in categories of, well, they're believers and I'm an unbeliever, so I can't do what they do. I got to stay over here. It's going to be very natural for them to to be involved with the kinds of things that believers are doing, that they simply invite them to join them and become a part of that.
I think you're right that people in smaller towns generally are really good at caring for each other in ways that people in bigger cities just don't naturally do as much. And I can imagine that's a huge opportunity for churches, because like if someone from our church does a big extravagant act to serve another family or to serve the city, or if our church does a huge community service day or whatever, it's very likely that people down the street have no clue what we just did. Right. But if your church or families at your church do something like that, even for one family, it'll probably be noticed in the community. Right. So I think the opportunity for love to spread in a smaller community might be a little bit more viral, like I guess, compared to a bigger church. I think is an awesome opportunity.
Absolutely. I remember we were in Corn. We had somebody who went through a health crisis, a farmer, and it was harvest time. So everybody in the community, it wasn't just certain people. I mean, it wasn't like, well, the believers all got together or the unbelievers. Right. I mean, it's like we're neighbors, we got together and we brought in that man's harvest. And so, people in rural communities are just naturally inclined to reach out to neighbors, to help neighbors. And that could be a great way to hopefully set the table for that opportunity to move into a spiritual conversation at some point.
You mentioned how when you first kind of got settled in a smaller church, you mentioned it was kind of a cross-cultural experience for you, even though same language, they look similar, all those kinds of things. And I'm always kind of intrigued, any kind of cross-cultural ministry experience, you want to be cautious and respectful of the differences, right? But you also don't want to totally alienate them, because they're also just people, just like we're people, right? Like I'm always amazed when I go across the world, people are people. I mean, basically have the same basic needs. So there's just this fine line of acknowledging and being cautious about cultural differences, but at the same time, not making it out to be that they're so different and so, weird or whatever, that you feel awkward interacting with them. So as that relates to evangelism and your experience with a pastor, have you noticed any differences specifically with evangelism other than what we've talked about so far? So let's say there's a new family in town. You invite them over to church. They don't have a church background. What are kind of your steps to kind of introduce them to faith, walk them along the steps of faith? And is it any different, or would it be the same regardless of where you are?
Yeah, I do think it would be different in a context of social intimacy, because you're going to meet those people. You just are. Yeah. Whereas in a city context, you may never see them again. So you may have that one opportunity. So, I mean, I would probably be fairly surprised if unbelievers move into a town and someone invited them to church, that they would immediately say yes and come to church. Yeah. That I'm sure that happens, but I would guess that more often than not, it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. I think you have to build goodwill. You have to create a bridge. You do it through relationships in a small town. And hopefully as a church, you're developing a relationship or a reputation, of being a caring church, a church that helps people, cares about people, loves people. As that reputation becomes known to the newcomers that move in, it starts to sound like maybe a place I'd like to be a part of. Yeah. I would appreciate being in that kind of a environment. And so eventually I would hope that good reputation that is established by good works that the church is doing in the community, both collectively as a church and then also personally as the believers in the church are doing one-on-one, eventually those good works will bear fruit. I'm reminded of the verse in Colossians chapter 1. I think it's in, I think it's in verse 10, where Paul prays for the Colossian church. And by the way, the Colossian church was a small town church. It was the smallest town that Paul wrote to of all of his letters. And in Paul's prayer, he asks the Colossians to be pleasing to God in every way. And then he lists 4 ways. And the first on his list is bearing fruit in every good work. So good works in a context, especially of social intimacy, are a great way to produce fruit. And I think that that's the love language, if you will, of rural people. And that's a key way, I think, for rural people to be able to be effective in their outreach to unbelievers in the community.
Yeah, that's good. I can tell how much you elevate and place an impact on relationships. You say that word over and over and over again. I think that's so important in every church, but I see how it's especially important in rural churches.
So one thing, honestly, now that I've been in rural ministry for 40 years, I feel so distant from my city background. So, I could turn this interview back on you and say, well, how do you reach out to people, in the city? And I don't know how I would answer that question. I guess you probably do it by sort of being an attractional church, so you got to have that nice facility. You've got to have maybe 3 different services that reach different groups of people. You got to have all kinds of programs for people in different situations of life. And those are all good, but that's kind of a whole different approach to evangelism, I think, than in a rural community. I don't think they're going to care nearly as much about what your building looks like. Yeah. And you're probably going to be a smaller church, so you're not going to be able to have 3 different services that attract different population groups. Yeah. So it's your reputation. It's your social networks that are going to make the biggest difference and be the bridge to outreach in a rural community.
You're absolutely right. And I think, if you have a nice facility and you're known for really great programming and all that, you'll get some people to wander in. But I think you're right that it comes down to relationship no matter what your church is like. I think it comes down to the people in your church having good relationships with people outside your church and knowing how to gently mention faith in ways that are natural and kind of baby step forward. I think that's true whether you're at a huge mega church or if you're in a rural community. I think you're right that it all comes down to relationships.
It would be more challenging, I would say. And again, I'm 40 years removed from the city, but I would think, man, it would be more challenging to figure out how to develop those relationships in a city. Whereas in a rural setting, it's just what you do. It's very natural.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think we're 50 some episodes in. I think you're the first person to turn the interview around on me. So congratulations. You're the first.
Well, I would love to hear, but I realize that's probably going to be another interview. But just, we could compare and contrast. It would be fun to go back and forth. And it's not right versus wrong. It's it's your context. You have to really become a student of your context, become a student of the people in your context, and then develop strategies that are appropriate for that context.
Yep, that's very good. So let's say, I'm just curious, again, I'm not sure if this is a culture thing or if this would just be kind of across the board for everybody. Let's say you have a meaningful relationship with someone, an unbeliever, or maybe they are unchurched right now for whatever reason. I'm just curious, Ron, for you, do you find over time, has your approach to evangelism changed where, it used to be, if you died today, where would you go? Do you find that to still be effective in rural communities, or do you find kind of the scientific where the world come from? Like if you're kind of having that kind of discussion with someone, what kind of things do you bring up that might be helpful in that situation?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be very effective typically to say, if you were to die tonight, would you wake up in heaven? Mm-hmm. I don't think that would be effective in a rural context. What I found was most helpful was to put myself in situations with unbelievers where I'm going to be in conversation with them. Yeah. So, for instance, in Nebraska, it was cattle country. Everybody in our church was ranchers. Okay. So I would often go to brandings. I learned how to do everything you do at brandings, and you're right next to cowboys, and you're having conversation. I found a great way to develop conversations was in a tractor or a combine. They have a buddy seat almost always, and they're in there for hours on end, and they just enjoy having somebody come and join them, make a few rounds in the field with them, and inevitably you talk life in those circumstances, and there's something going on in their life. If you go to sporting events, I tried to make a point of not just sitting next to people that were in my church, but sitting next to people I might have met in the coffee shop. And just, football is a great pastoral sport because you're sitting in the stands and there's like 5 seconds of something happening, and then there's almost 60 seconds of nothing happening. Yep. So you can get a lot of conversation. And, men in rural communities are not likely to show up in your office unless there's something really big going on in their life.
Yeah.
And say, Ron, can we sit down and talk? Mm-hmm. But if you're in a tractor with them, if you're on the way to a cattle sale and you're in their pickup driving an hour to the sale barn, if you're at a ball game and you're just doing conversation, inevitably there's going to be something going on in their lives that can lead to some kind of a spiritual conversation. Yeah. And I think that is far more effective than just opening up, taking a tract out of your pocket and giving it to them and asking them to read it. Just probably not going to work in most rural contexts.
Absolutely. I agree. I don't think that works well in a city context either. I think in today's culture, wherever you live, you've hit it. Relationships are just where it's all about. You can't really rush this. It has to be a long-term investment. And I could see, since that's going to be true everywhere, how there are some real benefits to doing that in a rural community, or you have some of that time like you're talking about, and you see people all the time. That just seems like a great opportunity for that kind of relationship.
And it's good to try to think about, where can I intentionally place myself where those kinds of conversations are going to happen? I was a volunteer rescue squad person in Nebraska. Our average ambulance run was about 4 hours because our hospital was so far away. We were very remote. And so by the time we went and picked up someone, took them to the hospital, did the paperwork, made sure they weren't going to be coming back with us, and then the long drive back, that created real opportunity, first of all, to be close to somebody who's in a crisis because they're in the back of that ambulance.
Absolutely.
So that can lead to some follow-up conversation. It's very natural then a few days later just to go and visit them and say, I'm concerned. I wonder how you're doing. Yeah. And also, we always had buddies in the ambulance. So I always had somebody sitting beside me if I was driving or if I was on the passenger side. And it was over an hour to the hospital.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. You're in conversations. One of my best friends in our rural community in Nebraska was the bartender, the owner of our local bar. Mm-hmm. I spent hours and hours with him in rescue squads, and we had a number of spiritual conversations, had quite a rapt audience, when you're together for an hour. So I tried to be strategic and tried to think about, where can I insert myself into situations where those kind of conversations are going to happen sooner or later.
That's very good. One of my last questions, this is just kind of a curiosity thing. So I don't know, again, the exact size of the various towns that you've been in, but I lived in Sterling, Kansas for a little while, not too far from Hillsboro. And I know sometimes in those smaller towns, like in Sterling, it's a small town, but there's 5, 6, maybe 7 churches. I know in Hillsboro, it's kind of a joke. The 2 MB churches in Hillsboro like to kind of poke fun and compete with each other a little bit. So how have you seen that work in small towns? Have you seen smaller churches maybe able to work together in a small town better than they can in a large town? How do you deal with that kind of friendly rivalry, or does that ever get messy, or how do you handle kind of multiple churches in a small town?
Well, I'd say all of the above. It kind of depends on the situation, depends on the personalities involved. Sometimes pastors, like other people, they just don't connect with other pastors very well, just on a personality kind of basis. It depends on what you're looking to do together. I think there's a lot of things that you can be intentional about doing together, even if you have some pretty significant doctrinal differences. You can still run a food pantry, for instance, and that sort of thing. Maybe you wouldn't want to share a Good Friday service or something or Thanksgiving or whatever service, because your differences are so great doctrinally. But there are things that you can do together as a community to collectively just show the community that the churches work together. They're not fighting each other. I don't think that's good for anybody. It's not good for the churches, not good for the people in the community to see. So it just seems like our bent should be to try to do as much as we can with our fellow pastors and churches in town. Certainly on a personal level, I would try to get together with other pastors, and folks in the cafe would see us having a cup of coffee together. I think that spoke well of our relationship and our reputation. So I do think it's important to, as much as possible, be kind and welcoming to our fellow pastors and churches.
Yeah, I could see how it could go both ways, just depending on personalities. I could see that totally. Ron, it's been great talking to you. I'm looking forward. I'll be at the convention in July. I look forward to seeing you there. I encourage everyone listening to sign up to join us if you haven't yet, so you can hear more from Ron. As we kind of begin to close up here, Ron, anything else that we haven't gotten to, either for rural, or is there anything that you want to say to the bigger churches? Any other kind of closing thoughts to anybody who might be listening today?
Oh, wow. I guess I would just encourage maybe folks in bigger churches to draw a radius, say 30 to 60 miles around their church, and think in terms of what kind of spiritual needs might be in some of those places, and think in terms of what they might do to have a presence in that community. You can have people commuting into your church in Wichita. Sure. That helps the people that are coming to your church, but that doesn't translate so much into a presence in that community. Yeah. So if churches could be intentional, larger churches, city churches could be intentional about their rural neighbors and doing something intentional to reach out to them, I would really encourage that.
Yeah. I think there's just something too, like wherever you are, like there's benefits and difficulties, right? We've kind of spent a lot of time talking about that. So I think there's so much potential for small town churches, and there's so much, like the relationships might be formed so much easier, and there's just a lot of benefits. So I think wherever you are, just take advantage of those. And I think we're all guilty of kind of looking at other churches. The grass is always greener, wishing we had things that we didn't, but wherever you are, God can use you and good things can happen. So I love it.
And I just feel so privileged to be involved in rural ministry. I just pinch myself with wonder that God made this the path for my life. It wasn't what I would have chosen, but in His sovereign plan, 40 years in, and it's just been such a privilege. So I'm very thankful.
That's awesome. Ron, thank you for your time today. Thanks for your great work with RHMA, and if people listening, I guess we haven't mentioned that yet. Can you tell us what's your website for people who might want to learn more?
Yeah, just simply rhma.org. So it's very easy. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all your leadership, Ron. Grateful for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you in July.
Great. Good talking to you, Matt.
Do you want to stay connected to news and information from within our Mennonite Brethren family? USMB offers several ways you can receive the most current news and updates. Sign up to receive Snapshot, a personal bi-monthly update from Don Morris, the USMB National Director. Snapshot includes information about important decisions and ministries within the MB family, along with ways you can join in prayer. You can also sign up to receive C-Link, an online bi-monthly newsletter featuring news and stories from the Christian Leader magazine. C-Link offers timely news so you can stay in tune with what's happening in our Conference of Churches. Sign up for both newsletters on the USMB website at www.usmb.org.
Well, thanks again to Ron for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And, I really appreciated Ron's kind of just perspective on ministry, especially with him moving from Phoenix to smaller towns, and just that idea of kind of a cross-cultural ministry experience. And, most of us don't think about that if we're interacting with people who mostly look like us, who speak the same language. We don't think of that as cross-cultural, but it often is. And it's good to be mindful of that and to, especially in ministry context, be aware of those differences. But like we kind of found out in this episode, it really is all about relationships, right? Whether you're in a small town or a big city, relationships come first, and then you're able to kind of talk about faith as it becomes more and more of a close relationship. So that's one of my big takeaways from this long series about evangelism. It's all about relationships. So we'll obviously dive into that a lot more at the convention coming up, and I hope you've enjoyed getting to know the speakers as we've had them on the show the past several weeks. We will be kind of shifting gears and doing some different episodes here coming up, starting in the next episode. So please, wherever you're listening, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button so we can get some new episodes coming to you shortly. And wherever you're listening, thanks again for being here today. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time right here on the Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.